Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I'll tell you what, for today's guest, we have been so excited to invite her onto the show as soon as we saw the name of her signature program, because this is something that, as all of us, not only as entrepreneurs, but I would argue as people, we're constantly looking for this answer, because her signature program is called Find What Lights You Up. And today's entrepreneur does such deeply meaningful and impactful work with all different types of people, not just entrepreneurs, when it comes to our life's journey and finding meaning and purpose inside of it. So let me introduce you to today's guest and entrepreneur. Her name is Mihika Roy. Mihika is the founder of The Miracle Trail, which is a coaching and personal development company dedicated to helping individuals realign with their purpose and passions. With a background in psychology and global media, such an interesting intersection, Mihika combines her expertise in human behavior with her love for storytelling to guide clients on meaningful journeys of self-discovery and growth. As a former co-curator for a leading life transformation retreat company and the driving force behind a successful holistic wellness program, Mihika brings years of experience in designing impactful growth experiences. Her signature program, like I teased, Find What Lights You Up, is a 12-week guided journey that helps individuals uncover their unique passions, overcome self-doubt, and craft an empowered vision for their future, which is just the perfect segue, because those are all of the things that we all must do on our own entrepreneurial journeys, because so much of this is driven by our mindset and what we're willing to overcome and the purpose and passions that we want to pursue. So I'm excited about this one. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Mihika Roy. All right, Mihika, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Brian, and for that lovely introduction.
Yes, well, honestly, Mihika, there's a lot of good stuff that we're going to get into. You and I talked off the air. You put so much good stuff into the world. I've seen some of the workshops that you run with your clients and how impactful the work is that you do. So before we get to your work, though, you've got to take us beyond the bio. Who's Mihika? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
I think that's a great place to start. I think my journey really started when I was about 19. I was an undergraduate studying English and psychology, and like many other undergraduates, I felt like I had more questions in life than answers. At that point, I started reading up a lot on different aspects on spirituality. And while reading, I realized that what I was feeling and the questions I had were stemming from a lack of understanding of my inner self. That of course helped, and I had more answers, but I ended up going into grad school for my global media and communication degree. I then graduated and worked a couple of jobs and found myself in what seemed like a race. I started to notice that me and almost everyone else around me, even the people who were seemingly very successful, were just fundamentally unfulfilled. And that really bothered me. Soon after, there was a point where I quit from my job at an ad firm and went on to first work as part of a functional wellness center and eventually as part of a creative life transformation retreat. And here I am now talking to you a little over 5 years from that day, having helped more than 100 women live fulfilled and inspired lives. And this, Brian, largely happens as a result of me helping them draw out clarity out of complexity. That's a good way for me to introduce myself beyond the bio, I think.
Yeah, I really appreciate that overview. Mihika, I'll be honest, what I really like about that story is you start all the way back when you're 19. That's when my entrepreneurial journey starts as well, because I feel like from those young ages, we're set on this, you called it a race, but I feel like no one has quite shared with us what that finish line is that
Absolutely.
It's, pick a major before you even know what it is that you're into and what you're not into, and then go do the things. And we we never take that time to self-reflect. Talk to me about that race and that proverbial finish line that no one ever illustrated for us and with us, because it seems to me like that clarity that you talk about, that's something that should happen way sooner. So I'm grateful that you work on that with people, but what does that process look like? Clarity around what? How do we even begin to make sense of any journey that we're on?
I think that's just such a good way of talking about it, Brian. One of the things that I do is with everyone I work with, everything is highly personalized and curated for their specific needs, depending on what they've identified as their starting point or finish line, proverbial finish line, which no one, like you said, seems to get to. But I think the number one process is something I call unburdening. And as part of unburdening, I help my clients identify what has been holding them back and weighing them down. So for many people, this would be their own fears and doubts, right? So imagine that there are these stones laid out that are supposed to help you cross a river and to get from point A to point B. Some of these stones are solid and keep you afloat, while others are these stones that will sink and pull you down with them as soon as you step on them. All of us have these sinking stones in our life. For example, someone I worked with last year came to me because she felt stuck in her job. She had aspirations of like rising up the corporate ladder, but she felt like she couldn't, and she just didn't know why. Every time a senior position opened up, she filled in an application, updated her resume, but just couldn't hit submit. As I worked with her through this process, what she was able to recognize was that what was preventing her from hitting the submit button was an experience from a couple of years ago where she had applied for a position, was almost certain that she would get it, but didn't. That instance sowed so much self-doubt to a point where even though she felt stuck, she couldn't get herself to apply for another position because she believed that she couldn't get the job. That insight unlocked courage in her to take the next step, for which she started, really mustering that courage over and over again. And that next step for her was really a big deal given where we had started, right? And finally, in August, she actually got that new position that she wanted and is looking forward to the responsibilities it brings along with. The other aspect is really about helping people find what lights them up, right? Like, this is the next aspect where there are two parts to this. The first part is really the journey to help them identify their core values. I really believe that the key to living a fulfilled life is to ensure that the largest part of what we do is aligned with our core values. Usually we are, subliminally aware of our core values. What I help with is to get my clients to a point where they are able to understand what truly matters to them and why. And this really helps with the race that we spoke about earlier. One way to do this is by making them identify what aspects of their day or week makes them feel the most fulfilled. For you, Brian, with the kind of work you do, one of your core values would probably be community building. This is why you feel a sense of fulfillment in connecting entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs through this podcast and the other work you do. And then once the client has identified their set of core values, the goal becomes to find ways to do more things in life that align with them. Sometimes this means very big changes, but most times it's little things that one can make time for or do more of in life. I find that as my clients begin aligning more of their everyday life to their core values, their levels of fulfillment increase too. For example, a client I worked with who is a successful media professional, through our process identified spreading joy as one of her core values. While parts of her work were, already allowing her to spread joy to people, I helped her identify that another way to help her do this would be through something else she truly loves, which was art. And this further led to her, carving time out over the weekend and use it to teach art to young children within her neighborhood. It allowed her to do so much more of what lights her up even further, resulting in her feeling an even deeper sense of alignment and fulfillment. And then the third aspect is helping people step into their own power. Now that the client has, understood what was holding them back and understood their core values, they've also come up with potential ways they could start to align more of their lives with their core values. The next piece is to help them create an actionable plan, right? The action plan then needs to help them create like a larger vision they have for their life, and it often involves leaning heavily into their own gifts and strengths further. I work with them to identify these as initial steps, which are like easy to do and from within low hanging fruits around them. And then they can start with that, the habits they need to establish to make consistent progress, and the things they would need to do in case they run into hurdles. So, depending on the client's individual context and circumstances, their journey of stepping into their own power sometimes takes a little time, sometimes takes a lot of time. But what is key is at the end of the program with me, they're equipped with a plan that helps them wake up feeling inspired again and, find out that it's not really about the finish line as much as it's also about the journey, right? So that's what I kind of help with.
Yes, I love the way that you talk about that, Mihika. And I will say you are absolutely correct in that for me, a lot of people, so typically my recording days are on Tuesdays, and I do 8 podcast interviews on Tuesdays, back to back to back all day long. And people always ask me, aren't you exhausted by the end of it? And the truth is, I feel more energized by the end of those days because I know that I'm doing what I'm passionate about and I'm driven by that. It fuels me quite literally. And so I think it's so important. And that's why I love the steps that you've laid out, because it unshackles us from all of the things that hold us back and put us into that alignment that you talk about. What I'm really fascinated by about your work, Mihika, is to me, it almost seems like you work with the known and the unknown. When I listen to you talk about removing the self-doubt, I would imagine that so many of the people that you help, a lot of times they're aware of the self-doubt and they say, no, I don't think that I can accomplish this because I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money, I don't know the right people, whatever it may be. Versus sometimes I would argue, especially in my own entrepreneurial journey, I've realized that sometimes I'm not even aware of those limiting beliefs. Sometimes I'm not even aware of the self-doubt that's holding me back. It's this invisible force. Can you talk to us about that known versus unknown and how we go about uncovering those things that might be blocking us without us even realizing it?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question, Brian, and which is why all the work that I do is fundamentally rooted in self-awareness and self-discovery, right? The known stuff is easy. The known stuff is stuff that we've been dealing with for a really, really long time, and we have it at the top of our head. It's the unknown stuff which is really the devil, right? And then the devil is in the details. So part of my process is to get you to see what your blind spots are. And so you might be thinking that it's your time which is limited, and that's what the obstacle is. But very often it's stuff that you're spending your time on which doesn't feel like it's energizing you. And because it's draining you, you will end up feeling like it's stretching you out and you're spread too thin, etc. So realigning those little things over the course of our interactions is something that I do a lot of. I would say take stock. There's something called an energy map, right? Especially where you're trying to figure out your blind spots, figure out things that drain you. Do a little bit of that energy mapping for yourself. Figure out what are the activities that you really like doing, things that are lighting you up, things that are making you feel lighter, right? The other thing is also sometimes it's emotional and energetic blocks that are keeping you stuck. And take stock of what has been weighing you down beyond the obvious. And it could be a conversation you had with your spouse that didn't go well. It could be a financial pressure which you're facing and you don't even know is causing you to be in such a state of, doubting your own abilities. So take stock of your energy map, take stock of your emotions and what caused you to kind of feel really low about something. And when you're able to do enough self-reflection, mindfulness helps with this, meditation helps with this, a lot of journaling. I think journaling is a very powerful tool when it comes to figuring out what's holding you back. And Julia Cameron, for example, talks about the morning pages, which is just stream of consciousness writing in the morning. That helps a lot. But if you feel like you're not a morning person, you can do like a bedtime brain dump where you're just sitting with yourself, talking about what happened through the day. And that could be a really helpful activity too. If you feel like you want to just gather your energy and center yourself in the middle of the day, to arrive at certain specific answers, you can do that with a short centering, grounding meditation as well. And believe me, it might seem like these are really simple things to do, but these are what add up eventually and create the bigger miracle that we're seeking.
Yes, I love the way that you articulate that, Mihika. I want to move right on down that process that you've already laid out and start talking about those values and two big words that I feel like we throw around so much in the world of entrepreneurship: purpose and passion. You know, everybody always tells us to follow our passion. Mihika, I've been so excited to hear your insights in this regard, because when I look back at my life, and you and I both start our journeys from very young ages, when I look back at childhood and even something like picking a major, I feel like we suffer from a little bit of bias in the fact that it's easy to think that we are passionate about something just because we're good at it. So for me, for example, soccer was one of my earliest passions in life. So does that mean that I have to do something regarding soccer in my professional life? No, of course it doesn't mean that I have to. It's one of many passions that I have, whereas entrepreneurship is obviously another passion of mine. But I feel like we do suffer from those biases, whether it's recency bias or selection bias, whatever it may be. I studied statistics a lot. You obviously studied psychology, so we understand the natural biases that our brains go towards. How do we start uncovering those things that we, our inner light, is truly passionate about versus just the things that we've been pushed into, whether it's from childhood, whether it's from natural segues and turns and twists in our career paths, versus those things that we just say, no, this is something inside of me and I'm no longer going to ignore it? Mihika, it's a loaded question, but how do we get into those real purposes and passions?
You know, Brian, I've spent the last decade of my life figuring that out, and I'm only 30, right? So I think that's a very, very, very important part of my journey personally as well. I think for many of us, we already know what we want to do in our life, right? It feels like a calling, it feels like a combination of what we're good at, what we're passionate about, what we also have the aptitude for, what we are gifted with. So it all comes together quite naturally. For many of us, we actually have to go through a certain degree of diverse experiences over a period of time to be able to get to certain answers for ourselves. So yes, we should continue doing what our passion kind of leads us into, and that is stuff that lights us up. It does not necessarily have to become a profession, but over a period of time we begin to get a sense of purpose, and with purpose there are two key words that I believe are really helpful. One is a sense of service, and the other is a sense of impact. So your passion sometimes or very often is more for yourself. It's something that brings you joy personally. Whereas your purpose will almost always be something which creates impact, which comes from a sense of service, right? And so where your impact and your service and your skills kind of come together is what you would look at more as your purpose. In Indian spirituality, there's a term, it's called swadharma, which is your innate duty to who you truly are within, right? And I think what you've spoken about is great, but another thing that we don't want to overlook in this whole wayfinding process is how much conditioning there is and how much pressure there is culturally to do jobs that would help us get more money, get more fame, etc., etc. And all of that is really important. Please don't get me wrong. I feel like money is a really important part of our life. It gets us going, it gets things going, it makes the world go round in a lot of ways. But if we chase that without the sense of fulfillment that really comes with doing something where that sense of service, where that sense of impact is, it's going to feel like you're working towards a lost cause. which is why, a lot of movies in recent times have shown that. And I think the song "What Am I Made For example, which won so many awards recently, was so close to my heart, and I was like, oh my God, she's really capturing the heart of so many struggles that people deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so I would really go back to the question, and I call this, one of the first principles questions: what would bring me the maximum amount of fulfillment? And if I'm able to understand what brings me most fulfillment and do more stuff that helps me align with that sense of fulfillment, I will almost always make more meaningful choices, which will then lead me to getting a chance to do what I'm passionate about, but also something where I feel like I'm leaving a universal imprint by the service or by the sense of purpose that I'm able to fulfill in my lifetime.
Wow, Mihika, I'll tell you this. In 36 years of life and over 1,000 episodes of doing this show, I've never heard anyone talk about that distinction between passion and purpose the way that you have. And that's totally lit something off inside of my head, because it is such an interesting thing to explore, because we are on this never-ending journey of fulfilling ourselves and, of course, being a valuable member of the communities, the planet, the place that we are. And I think it's so important to understand that harmony between both of those. And speaking of that harmony, Mihika, I think that what really stands out to me about the way that you work is, we actually just saw it in the way that you answered that last question. You called out, yeah, money is something that affects our lives, and inner passion, that's something that affects our lives. It just seems to me like you understand the harmony and the balance between all of these things. And that's why I really want to talk to you about life and work, because you and I both live here in the United States. We are a very work-centric society, for better and for worse. And I think that a lot of people intertwine those things so deeply. Talk to us about that balance, because it just seems to me like such a core part of your work is ensuring that both sides of that, both individually but also collectively, that life and work play together so beautifully.
There's something called the law of least effort. Okay, and then there is utilizing our gifts. So I think somewhere between these two is where we really have to kind of do the inner work, do the self-awareness, do the personal growth work, find a coach, go to a therapist, etc. Just find out what is the stuff that you do which you feel you're gifted with, because that in itself becomes work that you will use the least amount of effort with and be good at fundamentally. So lean into your strengths. I mean, I feel like I keep telling myself, and sometimes I sound like a broken record when I'm talking to people and addressing them about this. I'm like, what are the strengths you have? What are things that people compliment you on? Do more of that, refine it. Sometimes it starts off with, doing a little, you're doing your main job and you're going to your 9 to 5. Fantastic. That's really important. Maybe sometimes in the process of finding your passion or your purpose, that becomes really important because that's what's paying the bills. But you cannot let your life be limited at that. You have to push and push and push and say to yourself that this is not how my story is going to end. I am going to find out what truly lights me up. I am going to find where my values are. I am going to find what I'm good at and lean into my strengths and do more of that within my life, right? And so that law, because of the fact that you're gifted, the amount of effort that you will need to do that thing will be less anyway. And that'll cause you to shine because it's something that you have an unfair advantage about, or in the context of in general. Like, for example, I remember very early, one of my professors said to me, "Oh, Mihika, your voice is, it's too low. It's not. It doesn't have the right pitch for like public speaking or whatever." And I was like, thankfully I didn't take it to heart, or I didn't let it limit me. But eventually, one of the things that it helped me do was guide people into really deep states of meditation. So even within that thing which someone else saw as a flaw, I was like, okay, how can I see this as something that I can use to my advantage? Maybe I wasn't even thinking about it consciously back then, but it was something that I felt like I was gifted with. Maybe my pitch will lead people into an inner journey, for example. So really, like, that's the balance that I'm talking about, and also, don't take what people say to you at face value. Like, just constantly question what's going on. Like, does this feel true? Does it feel right? Because it's really important to overcome that self doubt. So when someone else externally, especially, is trying to implant it, do the work of figuring out what's going on inside of you, and do you feel like that's actually something you want to believe? Because, like I gave in that an example of a little earlier, it can really be detrimental to who you are and how you express yourself in the world.
Yes, so well said. Mihika, you talk about questioning everything. I think that that's part of what makes us entrepreneurs deep within ourselves, is that we love questioning things. In fact, even the career choice of being an entrepreneur, I've heard it for most of my life. Mihika, when I was graduating college, a lot of people would say to me, oh, are you going to get a real job? And I was like, what do you mean? Entrepreneurship is a real job. I'm going to impact a lot of people through my work. And I so appreciate the way that you articulate that. One word stands out to me about what you just shared with us, and you said that oftentimes you need to remind yourself. And what I love about that, you sharing that, is really that open recognition of, this isn't work that we can do once. It's not a question that we aim to answer and boom, problem solved. It is a practice. It is something that we always have to reflect on, remind ourselves on. We have to constantly be asking questions to evolve and grow over time. It's not a fixed position. So with that in mind, Mihika, you talk about all these very important things. How do we put it into practice in our lives? Is it a weekly practice, a daily practice? Is there something we can do monthly or quarterly to reflect on things? I'd love to hear about that ongoing practice and how you integrate that.
I think you have to develop a deeply meaningful relationship with yourself and almost treat yourself like sacred. You have to consider yourself to be really important, and you have to listen to what your inner communication is trying to say to you. So for in the form of a daily practice, it would look like maybe spending time meditating, maybe doing a little bit of journaling, maybe going for a walk by yourself. So that, carve out that me time for yourself as much as you can, and that'll help you build that relationship with yourself. If you can't do it daily, find a way to check in with yourself on a weekly basis. Many of my clients, they'll say, oh, I'm so busy through the week, I can't even imagine taking out 15 minutes of my day for myself, when, like, while not being productive and not just spending time with myself. Mihika, what are you talking about? And I would just be like, okay, if you can't start with a daily practice, maybe do something over the weekend. Maybe take yourself out for a date. Maybe go and sit with yourself, read a book, think of how the week went. But that constant process of reflection is the cornerstone of any kind of success we want to seek in our lives. I think that's really, really important, and I would encourage every single person to do that. And I think that's really where the rest of the self discovery also begins to happen. You would not know what are your triggers, you would not know what are your sinking stones, you would not know what your life vision is, you would not know the kind of changes you need to make unless you develop that. So start small, but start somewhere. Start with something really powerful can be a gratitude list. Even the things you are being grateful for example, will reveal to you about the kind of person you are, and the kind of dreams you have, and the kind of aspirations you have for your life. So, just start somewhere, but start with that self reflection process and develop that relationship with yourself. Treat yourself as sacred if you can. That sometimes takes time, because as human beings, we look at ourselves as such a flawed set of complexities. But we have something within us which is more than all the flaws.
Yes, so well said, Mihika. Earlier in our conversation, you used the term of we need to take stock. And in my head, I always tell myself it's time to take inventory. And so for me, it's Sunday coffee dates with myself, where I just go to a coffee shop and exert and practice that level of intentionality. And that's what I hear so much in our conversation today from the way you articulate these things is if we're intentional about it, if we're willing to do the work and explore and ask questions, then we can start finding these answers. But it's not going to happen by mistake, listeners. So we're going to talk about Mihika's program of Find What Lights You Up in just a minute. We're going to drop those links. But before we get there, Mihika, I always love asking this question at the end of sessions, and that is, what's your one best piece of advice? You not only do this work and you not only help other people, but you're one of us. You are a fellow entrepreneur. So knowing that we're being listened to by entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, personally and professionally, what's that one piece of advice that you'd want to leave them with here today?
So, Brian, I call my company the Miracle Trail, like I told you, right? And where it started from was that I realized very early on that miracles are not supernatural events that require divine intervention, right? They are small intentional shifts in consciousness. The trail of miracles is paved by gratitude and self love and forgiveness and compassion and courage and believing in abundance. And all of these are stepping stones in your journey to creating your own miracle. So even if you start with something seemingly small, start and you'll have your miracle on your way. Having said that, in a more generic way, I will reiterate bits of what I spoke about earlier for everyone. First thing, please find ways to identify and overcome your self doubt because that is a dream killer. So when you find yourself in a state of self doubt, you can ask yourself, what is it that I'm afraid of? And when was the last time this happened? And then ask yourself how the current situation is different because evidence based answers are what we're looking for, right? The second thing is take time to figure out your core values and align yourself to them and your life to them to whatever extent possible. That will help you make your life more meaningful. And in terms of figuring out what core values are and what your core values are, think about 3 decisions you've made recently. They could be big, they could be small, but the ones that felt right to you deep within, right? In those answers, your core values are hidden. So go ahead and do that. And the third and the last thing that I'd like to say is that have a vision for your life, right? It doesn't have to be based in vanity, but in an authentic expression of yourself. So often in life, you'll find yourself saying, wouldn't it be nice if this or that? I think somewhere, as far as your vision is concerned, that is where your vision for your life will begin to shape up.
Yes, so well said, Mihika. Listeners, can you see why we've been so excited to have Mihika here on the show? Is because this work is deeply impactful and meaningful. But Mihika, the one superpower that you also have on top of all the other things that you're amazing at is you make it actionable. You inspire us to actually take action. And even there in that advice, that is actionable. Listeners, go back and listen to it because Mihika laid out that very clear process for you, which is a perfect segue into your Keystone program, which is Find What Lights You Up. It's a 12-week guided journey. And I know that listeners are going to be keen to not only learn about that program that you have, but also all the other great work that you do. So Mihika, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Yeah, sure, Brian. Here's what I want everyone listening to do. Go to my website, www.themiracletrail.com. That's www.themiracletrail.com and book your free 45-minute discovery call with me. And we can use the call to answer any specific questions you may have on your personal growth journey or talk about some of the programs that I offer and how they can help you. Or we could just have a conversation about the kind of vision you have for your life, So just consider this to be an open offer for a virtual chat in some ways. You can also go to @the Miracle Trail on Instagram, where I share updates on upcoming programs, insights from things I'm reading and want to share with everyone, and other stuff I post on it. And you can also connect with me on my own Instagram page, which is Roy Mihika. So I think that's all of where you can find me.
Yes, and listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find those links down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. Super easy to remember her business website, themiracletrail.com. It's just themiracletrail.com. You don't have to remember it. You can click right on through from the show notes. You'll find that button. Book your discovery call. You don't just have to listen to Mihika in today's episode. You can actually get on the phone with her and interact with her one-on-one, just the two of you. So definitely take her up on that. We're also linking to her social links that she mentioned down below, so don't be shy. Otherwise, Mihika, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Brian. This has been incredible, and I'm sure there's even more stuff that's going to happen by being in touch with you and with the listeners. So thank you.